The thought of suicide was entertained by nearly everyone, if only for a brief time. It was born of the hopelessness of the situation, the constant danger of death looming over us daily and hourly, and the closeness of the deaths suffered by many of the others. From personal convictions, which will be mentioned later, I made myself a firm promise on my first evening in camp that I would not run into the wire. This was a phrase used in camp to describe the most popular method of suicide, touching the electrically charged barbed wire fence. It was not entirely difficult for me to make this decision. There was little point in committing suicide, since for the average inmate, life expectation, calculating objectively and counting all likely chances, was very poor. He could not, with any assurance except to be among the small percentage of men who survived all the selections. The prisoner of Auschwitz, in the first phase of shock, did not fear death. Even the gas chambers lost their horrors for him after the first few days. After all, they spared him the act of committing suicide. Friends who I have met later have told me that I was not one of those whom the shock of admission greatly depressed. I only smiled, and quite sincerely, when the following episode occurred the morning after our first night in Auschwitz. This book by Dr. Viktor Frankl, he's a very prominent psychiatrist, and he spent years living in a Nazi concentration camp. And his suffering there in the concentration camp, his horror, unspeakable horror in those years really helped him to look at things differently, to look at things from a psychological perspective, and that really enabled him to come up with this very famous theory, logotherapy, which has been credited in the industry, in the field, as the most significant thinking after Freud and Adler. So this is really, it really makes a good reading. It shocks your mind, it shocks your heart, and also we could remember that part of history very vividly.
So to prepare our readers and then the viewers for this book, do we need any psychiatrist training in order to read it?
Not necessarily. It's quite simple writing and then not a lot of psychological vocabulary. It's a mixture of what's happening in the concentration camp and the scientific part that he was talking about. So really it is a mixture of science and humanity. So it's quite easy to read. Personal experiences and some very simple approaches to a very complex theory.
What kind of lessons for all the people in the world can be drawn from this book? I mean, the most important lesson from not just the Holocaust, but all the horrible history made by man. What would you say about that?
Never lose your hope and always carry on in what you believe. And of course, I'd like to quote something from Dr. Frankl's preface. And he was saying that don't aim at success. The more you aim at it, and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it. And you're just going to let it happen by not caring about it. And really, it's the same thing for meaning. You don't push yourself too hard to try to make meaning out of things. Gradually, with time, with your experiences, with your understanding of this world, one day you will find meaning for the events that's happening around you and for the very reason of your existence.